Good morning. I'll call to order our regular meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee. I'm Lisa Bender. I chair the committee, and today is October 26th, 2017. We have a quorum with council members Goodman, Andrew Johnson, Council President Johnson, and I believe we'll be joined by council members Reich and Warsami. We have 4 items on the agenda today. We usually start with the consent items and then return back to the public hearing. We have 3 items under consent. I'm going to pull off the last one, so just discuss these first 2 consent items. Item number 2 is an alley vacation on West Lake Street near the Midtown Greenway, and it's vacating a portion of that alley there. And item number 3 is a vacation resolution correction at 1101 3rd Avenue South. This is a very old sort of administrative correction. So I will move items 2 and 3. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And those carry. And again, I will pull off item 4 for discussion later. That returns us back to item number 1, a certificate of appropriateness appeal at the security warehouse. And we will begin with a presentation by staff before opening it up for public testimony.
Good morning, Chair Bender, council members. It's our understanding that there was a request for continuance from one cycle to the, November 7th, I believe, Zoning and Planning Committee.
Perfect.
Thank you.
It must be the November 9th. Thank you. And I apologize. Thank you for the reminder. Is there anyone here who wanted to speak on this item? Okay. So we understood there was some discussion happening between the council office and the parties involved in this. So but I will go ahead and move to continue this item to the next ZNP meeting in 2 weeks, which is November 9th. Any discussion? All in approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That item carries. So that brings us to item number 4. This is regulation of off-premise advertising signs and a billboards ordinance, which is authored by Councilmember Warsami. I think we probably need a brief presentation from staff about where we are at and what came out of the Planning Commission would be the most helpful at this point. And we can see then if any colleagues have questions or motions.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members. I'm David Frank, Interim Director at CPID. What's before you today is a modest expansion of the downtown zone where billboards are permitted. There has been a great deal of discussion lately on this topic, and especially since the Planning Commission action. And so staff is recommending that in order to fully consider the issues and put something more considered in front of you, that you would refer this item back to staff and we would do more work and be back to you with a clear recommendation. So that's our recommendation at this time, Madam Chair.
Okay. Is there any questions or discussion from council members on that suggestion? Council President.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Frank. And I guess my concern about sending this all back is that I have been, since the new stadium was built, this has been a subject of discussion for a very, very long time. And so this, as you phrased it, Mr. Frank, the modest expansion is something that has been discussed within the community, at least too, as part of the redevelopment of the First Covenant block, parking lot, all that sort of thing. And so I think it's unfortunate that we've got kind of a mishmash, which I am very willing to listen to and evaluate the proposals that are that were rejected, I guess, by the Planning Commission, at some point. But I understand that this modest expansion would allow for some revenue to come to the vendor in light of the Super Bowl coming. And so I think it would be unfortunate to have that be the bigger picture, limit the ability to capture revenue that would be associated with the Super Bowl. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, but I'll listen to my colleagues and see where we go.
Councilmember Warsame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Mr. Frank, this modest expansion, can it not be done right now, and then we can take on the greater expansion at a later date? How does that work?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Warsame, I'll look to the attorney for some assistance here. It's my understanding that some of the other ideas that we've heard and that staff wants more time to consider would need to be considered together with this expansion that's before you now. Mr. Nielsen, could I ask for some advice here?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Warsame, so you were the sponsor of this action originally, and there have been other proposals that have come forward, other ideas. If the council in some fashion takes final action on this particular proposal that was recommended for denial by the Planning Commission, then anything else has to start completely over as a new proposal. So they have to find a council sponsor and do notice of intent and subject matter introduction. And even and that would even apply to some extent if the council were to look to do many of these other things that greatly exceed what the original kernel of the idea was here, that was the subject of the Planning Commission public hearing. So I think the big difference is if final action is taken on this particular proposal in some fashion, then you have to completely start over with a sponsor and notice of intent. If it's returned to staff, that gives staff the opportunity to evaluate all of these ideas and come forward with something that's been vetted without going back through the council sponsor process and notice of intent, et cetera, but would require going back to the Planning Commission.
So if I may ask you, Madam Chair, if I may ask Mr. Nielsen, question is, this proposal in front of us right now has been approved by the Planning Commission, correct?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Warsame, no, this was this modest expansion was recommended for denial by the Planning Commission. They did approve the striking of a separate provision about city financing of billboard advertising. It's one of our standard contract provisions that everyone views as rather antiquated. That was approved, but the expansion was not. Okay. So that is what's before you.
Are there further questions or discussion? Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If none of my colleagues have a motion, I'm happy to make one. Just checking around. All right, I'll go ahead and move that we refer this back to staff per the recommendation of staff for further work on this.
Council President.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess then Mr. Nielsen and Mr. Frank, Mr. Wittenberg, and Mr. Poor, when would we expect to have information back then on the proposal? I mean, what's the time frame then? What would be the earliest that we could consider this proposal?
Madam Chair, Council President Johnson, that's a question for CPED staff.
Okay.
Madam Chair, Council President Johnson, if you'll have to forgive the logic tree here, right? So if the action today is to Councilmember Johnson's motion and it's referred back to staff, we would not need to come to council to go back to Planning Commission. We would go directly to Planning Commission. Okay. And we have talked to some of the interested parties about how quickly we can do that. It's about noticing for public hearing and the staff work that's required before it. Okay, we believe it could be soon, but if the requirement is to have something done and in place and sign permits available before the Super Bowl, we do not believe we can necessarily hit that time. We might be able to. We would work as quickly as we can, but the way the noticing provisions work and Planning Commission dates, it might not happen. And then it would have to, of course, come back to you for approval. So I can't give you a direct answer. It has to do with what you choose to do now. And then let's say you vote yes on Councilmember Johnson's motion and it comes back to staff, the Planning Commission next, then back to Zoning and Planning, and then to City Council.
So that would be the most efficient route, though. However, rather than moving something forward and starting from scratch on a new ordinance for the part that isn't the modest expansion.
Madam Chair, Council President Johnson, I think the answer in the spirit of your question is yes. I do need to point out that what's in front of you now, not the staff recommendation that Councilmember Johnson has motioned, but rather the thing on the zoning and
Yes.
planning agenda, approving that is the fastest to have something in place, but the fastest to have a more considered package to you from staff is yes, Councilmember Johnson's motion. Did I say that as clearly as I could?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
I get it. So I'm going to take the lead, my colleague
Yeah,
here.
one more question. So you're saying right now, if we push this back, that there's no guarantee that we can get this sign ordinance done before the Super Bowl.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Warsame, correct. We will work as fast as we can, but there's some staff work that's required. There's noticing for planning commission dates, Z and P dates, and we of course don't know when next year's Z and P dates are at the moment. So there are enough questions that I can't stand here and guarantee that it would be done in time for Super Bowl signage.
Yeah, and then that kind of troubles me because we've done all this work we got here right now, and if we push this back, there's no guarantee that either party will get any updated billboards for the Super Bowl, which is the intention that they had in the first place. So that kind of does trouble me right now. Yeah. So I want to make a motion to approve what we have. So I don't know if we can vote on your motion or you can push it back.
Sure. So Councilmember Rasami has made a substitute motion to move forward the original ordinance proposal, the one that the Planning Commission denied. I think since we'll be covering then the substance of the ordinance, it would be helpful to have a brief review for the committee members of that original proposal and perhaps a little summary of why the Planning Commission denied that. I actually, unfortunately, was not at the Planning Commission that evening, so I missed it. So I have to rely on your good memory. I don't think I was there. Maybe I was. Thank you, Mr. Poor.
Good morning, Chairman Bender and committee members. So we've had quite a bit of discussion without a presentation, and the presentation is probably going to be briefer than the discussion. But I'll kind of give you a brief overview. The Downtown Entertainment Billboard District was a district created 2009, and it was an area that had two nodes, if you will. It was around essentially Target Center and at the time the Hubert Humphrey Metrodome. And at the time, there was a recognition that these were regional sports centers. We had some rules about regional sports centers, but they also had a need for additional off-premise advertising. Within that context, there was also a recognition that it might be appropriate and consistent with the comprehensive plan to have additional advertising in around surrounding adjacent areas. So the current proposal is in light of the recent completion of the US Bank Stadium. And so if we look at the map here, you can see this represents essentially the footprint of the stadium and the plaza around it. And so what we've talked about in this ordinance is just expanding this modestly across to Park and along down 6th Street. As some of you may be aware, there's quite a bit of advertising on US Bank Stadium. We do have the Viking ship with a sail that often has advertising and other presentations on it. And so again, the idea is that this is really a regional sports area, and it's consistent with the comp plan to expand this small area here. What's unique about the Downtown Entertainment Billboard District, in one sense, is you don't need these so-called sign credits to expand there. Sign credits are important because we have, since '94, we've had what's called a cap and replace system. So we basically grandfathered in most of the existing off-premise advertising structures that weren't in downtown or in substantial commercial nodes. And the mechanism worked in a way that you would remove square footage out in a residential neighborhood, maybe on a commercial node by a mom and pop grocery store, and you would get sign credits that could be transferred either downtown or along the freeways. And so that was an important mechanism because it really worked with, it was the larger bulwark against creating more billboards. It actually diminished billboards. And that was important because it shows up in the comp plan of talking about minimizing new off-premise advertising. So again, while we may see new structures in other parts of town, the mechanism worked to diminish the amount of off-premise advertising in areas that were deemed not appropriate. And so this downtown entertainment billboard district, first off, resides in downtown where there's a lot of billboards, and even under the cap and replace system, we allowed new structures to be built downtown. I only bring this out because one of the struggles we may have on a further discussion would be around this whole cap and replace and making findings and some other things. So if if we're talking about downtown, that's one thing. If we're expanding greatly outside of downtown on any other ordinance, that could be problematic. The other piece of the proposal that, and by the way, that was not approved by the Planning Commission. They didn't show favor to having any additional billboards anywhere. They raised concerns about proximity to residential development near U.S. Bank Stadium. The other piece of this is a fairly, what we think is an unnecessary and kind of superfluous arcane ordinance about limiting the city's involvement in off-premise advertising. It's been vetted through the city attorney's office, the attorneys that worked on contracts with the former MCDA and CPED. And it's never been an issue about city financing of billboards, so we think this is a good kind of housekeeping issue to get rid of this. In light of some of the recent developments and some of in downtown, including the Commons and some discussions with our other governmental parties, there may be some opportunities that removing this obstacle could be a good thing. But in all cases, it seems to be superfluous, arcane, and we've not found any examples where it was relevant, frankly, to any contracts with the city. So that's kind of a quick overview. I would like to comment, and I appreciate Interim Director Frank's comments. If it's sent back to us, we'll try to move fast with some alacrity, to bring something back to you. But I want to be clear about kind of the limits of what we can and can't write as a staff report in terms of getting the support. The initial draft that did go to COW that had some other elements in it was part of a larger package. And so it was easier to have a staff recommendation of approval knowing there were these other pieces in it. So I just want to say I don't think there should be any presumptions about a second recommendation on a different proposal would be, and that's why it's okay to bring it back, because we haven't done a thorough analysis. I couldn't tell you how many signs would be predicted in an expanded area downtown, for instance. I wouldn't be able to speak with confidence about view sheds from residential structures in an expanded area. And so that's why, and I think it's prudent if we do want to do more to bring it back to staff to let us do a more thoughtful analysis.
Okay, are there any questions for staff? Council President?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Purr, would this expansion then include the Hennepin County properties, the cooling towers for HCMC, and the morgue property?
Yeah, I had a very poor printout of an aerial, but the chiller unit that you're referring to, Council President, is right here.
Okay, so
Even under the current proposal, that's correct. It'd be
Okay.
right there.
Okay. And the morgue
The
parcel
morgue site, I
is
think, is right there.
okay. All right. Thanks.
Are there any other comments or questions for staff? I'll just comment, my inclination is to support the Planning Commission's position, which is, even in a ward like mine where there are very few billboards, I have just so much opposition to them. And so that's my position. While I know it differs from my colleagues. Is there any further discussion? So the motion in front of us is to approve the original expansion area. Any further discussion? Seeing none, clerk, why don't we call the roll on this motion?
Councilmember Andrew Johnson,
No.
Kevin Reich,
Aye.
Barbara Johnson,
Aye.
Abdi Warsami,
Aye.
Lisa Goodman,
No.
Chair Bender.
No.
That's 4 noes and 3 yeas.
3 and 3.
And 3.
So the motion fails. So that motion fails. From here, we could move to forward with that recommendation, or we could move to refer back to staff. Councilmember Johnson.
Madam Chair, just a point of inquiry. Because that was a motion on a substitute, does my original motion still stand? I would assume so. Okay.
That leaves us with Councilmember Johnson's motion, which was to refer back to staff. Is there discussion on that motion? Seeing none. On approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Okay, that
We should have a roll call on that too.
clerk, please call the roll on the motion to refer back to staff.
Andrew Johnson,
Aye.
Kevin Reich,
Aye.
Barb Johnson,
No.
Abdi Warsame,
No.
Lisa Goodman.
Aye.
Chair Bender.
Aye.
That's 2 noes and 4 ayes.
Okay, so that motion carries. We've referred the item back to staff for further consideration. That was the last item on our agenda, so we are adjourned. Thank you all so much.